Well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it!
Let's go! CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett, coming to you from our Washington, D.C. bureau. It is very good to be with you. Thanks very much for joining us. Here's a look at some of the stories we are watching right now. The battle over documents kept at former President Trump's personal residence, well, it continues. Why the Justice Department says only a limited number of documents can be shielded by attorney-client privilege. Plus, after a long series of declining poll numbers, President Biden's recent boost in approval ratings is giving Democrats some renewed optimism for the midterms. We will talk to leading members of both parties about that. A decrease in energy prices, an uptick in food prices, and a recent special election in upstate New York. What's driving voters in the upcoming midterms, and which party is best positioned to make gains? Plus, a judge says Georgia Governor Brian Kemp must testify about the 2020 election, but with a big exception. We've got the latest. We begin tonight with the Justice Department revealing in a finding today that a limited set, that's the key word, limited set of material taken by the FBI in its Mar-a-Lago search may contain information covered by attorney-client privilege. Department of Justice officials have completed their review of the documents that were seized. The filing follows an order from a federal judge Saturday that signaled this judge is likely to appoint a so-called special master to oversee the FBI's investigation into the former president's handling of documents, some of them classified. This after he left the White House. Trump last week requested a third-party review those seized documents. For more on all this, and it is complicated, let us please bring in Scott MacFarlane and Jessica Levinson. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Jessica, a CBS News legal contributor, and she is also a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Scott, let me start with you. How could this news impact the potential appointment of a special master, and help our audience understand what that is and what it might mean as this case plays out?
Yeah, this new filing from the U.S. Justice Department helps us get our bearings 3 weeks to the day after that search at Mar-a-Lago. What the Justice Department has made clear in this filing is that it has reviewed at least some of the items, some of the records that were taken, that were seized during the search at Mar-a-Lago 3 weeks ago today. They say a limited number of them, a limited set, could have issues of attorney-client privilege. All that does is raise the stakes this week. It makes it less clear to me exactly how the judge will rule, but informs the fact that there's a hearing Thursday of significant importance in this case. The federal judge in Florida, the U.S. District Court judge and appointee of former President Trump, appears ready to hear arguments as to whether to appoint this special master, this independent third party, this expert courts bring in when they need expertise or specialized knowledge. The Trump team wants a special master ordered, and the judge ahead of this Thursday hearing has also ordered the Justice Department to provide better or more detail about exactly what was taken during the search. A more fulsome, comprehensive list or set of details, that's due tomorrow. I'll tell you what, it's good that these court filings are done electronically. This week could kill a lot of trees otherwise.
So, Jessica, a lot of us are trying to peer into this, and some of it we can't peer into because it's classified and it's an ongoing investigation. The public is certainly very curious about this. The Trump legal team, deeply curious about it for lots of reasons. What about what we learned maybe Friday, over the weekend, today? Where are we? What does it enlarge our ability to comprehend where we are?
Yeah, great questions. I'll pick up on what Scott just said, which is the Department of Justice has indicated we actually looked at the documents here, meaning there's no need for a special master. We'll put a little caveat there for a moment. And what we determined is that a few, as you said, a few of these documents potentially are covered under attorney-client privilege. Now, the affidavit tells the Department of Justice what it can do in that circumstance. It can ask the magistrate judge overseeing the case, Judge Reinhart, it can ask for a determination if they actually are covered under attorney-client privilege. It can ask former President Trump to waive that privilege, or they can just decide, we don't need those documents. We're never going to hand them over to the investigation side, the investigation team. Now, back to the caveat, that's what we learned with respect to documents that might be covered under one privilege, the attorney-client privilege. But when former President Trump filed this motion in a different court, asking for the appointment of a special master, essentially somebody to say, you can use these documents, Department of Justice investigation team, but you can't use these because they're privileged. The Trump team mentioned the attorney-client privilege, but executive privilege as well. So what's left as an open question is, what about potential documents that are covered by executive privilege? Two quick responses to that. One, it's a very, very bizarre way to try and raise executive privilege from a former president with respect to these documents in this way at this time. And so really what we're looking for on Thursday when we have this hearing is for the judge either to say, okay, well, I guess we need a special master because of the executive privilege claims, again, even though I think they're very, very bizarre to say the least, or to say, I'm just dismissing your motion, former President Trump. I'm sorry, you lose, and the Department of Justice has a taint team and they've done their job here.
And Jessica, I want to pick up on one thread that you put forward there, and I think it's a very helpful one. So to think about this broadly, as I understand it, again, I'm not a lawyer, don't practice one on television, but attorney-client privilege endures. Executive privilege doesn't, meaning when you're no longer the chief executive, you don't have those privileges, and there's a process by which you have to assert them anyway. But attorney-client privilege does endure, and that's why the Justice Department says there's a legitimate assertion there, and we've tried to weigh that value of that assertion, attorney-client privilege. But in the national security context, it would be viewed differently, correct?
That's exactly right. So there are two separate tracks here. And you're right with respect to the attorney-client privilege that there is, again, to remind everybody, what happens when the Department of Justice goes in and they seize a bunch of different documents is that there's a separate team called a taint team, and they file and they go through and say, okay, the investigation side can't see these potentially privileged documents. Now, with respect to the national security concerns, I think you're exactly right to ask it that way, which is that is a separate track. What the Department of Justice told us is what we also heard over the weekend and last week, which is that the intelligence community is separately looking at these documents to determine whether or not there are national security risks that are posed by the former president having these documents. And that's different from, again, this inquiry into the attorney-client privilege.
Scott, as you well know, there is a very large political context around all of this. And South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham offered what can only be described as a stark, possibly alarming warning about what could happen should this get to the point where former President Trump is indicted. Let's listen.
I'll say this. If there's a prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified information after the Clinton debacle, which you presided over and did a hell of a good job, there'll be riots in the streets.
Riots in the streets. Scott, what is the level of concern you're picking up among either politicos or legal beagles around this whole case?
Yeah, major critics of the former president and critics of Senator Graham would say that sounds a lot like language from January 5th, 2021. I can tell you, talking to federal civil servants, the rank and file who work at these federal agencies, also to the unions and associations representing federal law enforcement agents, archives workers, they're concerned about the potential and future harassment they could face for having any touching of the sphere of investigations into former President Trump. We've seen that from January 6th. We've seen the federal judges who handle January 6th cases say they're getting vulgar, violent threats for their participation in that. We've seen that with others who've had any part of investigating January 6th, the potential for vulgar, violent threats. That is now spreading to those involved with this investigation. And the critics of the former president say words like that from Senator Graham could only fuel it.
And Scott, I mentioned earlier that lots of people are trying to peer more deeply into this case. Congress is too. What can you tell us about that? Well,
we know the Senate and House Intelligence Committees very much want to know what, if anything, was compromised with the nation's security and intelligence assets because top secret materials were where the Justice Department says they were not authorized to be. They want briefings. They want a readout of what might have been compromised, potentially what's going on with this investigation. Members of Congress often like to be looped in when there's something going on in the executive branch, and this is no exception.
There's lots of incrementalism. There's lots of law, lots of peering into it. We're all doing it together. Scott McFarland and Jessica Levinson, thanks so much for helping us out.
Thank you.
A security fence installed around the Supreme Court has been removed. It was put in place as a safety measure after a draft court opinion on Roe v. Wade was leaked back in May. Now, there are still some barricades remaining near the plaza and the front steps of the Supreme Court. The building has remained off limits to the public since it closed due to the pandemic in 2020. New polls are revealing what voters say they want ahead of the midterms, the top issues driving folks to the polls, and who they'd like to see in the White House. Plus, a judge agrees to delay Georgia Governor Kemp's testimony in Fulton County's 2020 election investigation, why the Republican was trying to fight the subpoena to appear before a special grand jury. You are streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. A recent poll shows former President Trump still at the top of many Republican voters' lists to be the nominee in 2024. According to a recent USA Today Ipsos poll conducted after the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, 59% of Republicans said Trump should be the 2024 GOP nominee. For more on all of this, Stephen Law joins us now. He's got a lot of titles. Let me go through them slowly. President and CEO of One Nation and conservative super PAC American Crossroads, also CEO of the Senate Leadership Fund. Stephen, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in. What are your thoughts on this poll? I know it's just one, and the overall Trump dynamic within the Republican Party and the midterms.
The president continues to have a lot of support from within the party, and certainly these latest events involving the Mar-a-Lago document search have put the spotlight back on him. But I think, for folks like us who are focused on the Senate elections, the real focus is and needs to be on the performance of this administration and Democrats who have majority control of both houses of Congress and what they've done on inflation, spending, crime, and other issues that are fundamentally important to the electorate right now as they start thinking about the midterm elections.
Now, Stephen, I've seen on your Twitter feed that you have identified yourself as either crime or permissiveness about crime as the sleeper issue of the midterms. Do you still believe that?
I think that's exactly right. If you look at this latest CBS poll, in fact, one thing that was quite striking to me is that right under inflation and the economy, crime was listed as an issue of top concern to voters, I think by 69% of voters. I mean, that's a huge, huge thing that we're starting to see, particularly in cities and then in suburbs that surround the cities where you've had this very lurid, serious crime that's made it tough to even want to go into the city to do what you might ordinarily do. So we think that's a big issue. It's something we're talking about right now in the Pennsylvania Senate race with advertising hitting John Fetterman for being soft on crime.
So I want to ask you about Pennsylvania and also neighboring Ohio. How do you think both of those races look right now?
I think both of them are very, very competitive. I'll start with Pennsylvania first. We had a very bruising, tough Republican primary that left Dr. Oz with a battered image, but I think he's getting back in the game, and he's going to be a good general election candidate. And then, as I said, with John Fetterman, he has a very, very bad record of permissiveness on crime, particularly his role as chairman of the State Board of Pardons, where he let people off the hook who committed very serious crimes. And I think that's going to be a big issue. Then you look at Ohio. I feel like at the end of the day, we'll be fine in Ohio. It's a Republican state. Donald Trump won that by 8 percentage points both times he ran. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to show that Tim Ryan, who's a pretty good candidate, has nevertheless been selling a line about himself, pretending to be a MAGA conservative when, in fact, he's voted with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time.
So, Stephen, for our audience's benefit, you are very close to the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell. He has aspirations to once again be the Senate Majority Leader. And he said last week, while back in Kentucky, 50-50 chance of regaining the Senate. That sounds not only cautious, but less optimistic than Republicans were 2 or 3 months ago. What has changed?
Well, Leader McConnell has always been cautious. That hasn't changed. And his discussion about what he thinks the odds are of this cycle haven't changed either. It is a tough cycle for us because we've got a lot of territory to defend. 2 states you mentioned, Pennsylvania and Ohio, and Wisconsin is another one, North Carolina as well. So we've got to hold our own territory. But if we do that, we've got some great pickup opportunities in states like Nevada and New Hampshire and Georgia. So I think we're going to have some real opportunities. But as you note, Leader McConnell is cautious and careful. That's why he's so successful in politics, is he doesn't just hand out the spin. He wants to win, and he knows how much hard work that takes.
Stephen, I always listen carefully to what you say and what you don't say. You did not list Arizona in the ranking of possible Republican pickups. And as I understand it, your organization's made some important strategic decisions about not investing as much as you might originally have in Arizona. Why?
Well, we've still got over $12 million booked in activity there for the month of October. And so we're leaving the door wide open there. And if you look at that race, a lot of Arizonans are starting to figure out that Mark Kelly has been voting right down the line with the Pelosi-Schumer-Biden agenda, and people don't like it. We just always move money around at this point in the game to different opportunities. And as we noted, when we did it, we had an investment to make in Ohio that we weren't expecting to do. And so that was what caused us to rejigger some of the money. But we leave the door wide open. And not only there, another couple of states that I didn't mention that could be on the list are states like Colorado and Washington State, where we have tremendously high-quality candidates who are running exceptional races, and we hope those races will become competitive as well.
So Democrats feel that they've got a little bit of a bounce in their step, and they're entitled to feel that way. They feel like the Inflation Reduction Act is helpful, that they see a little bit picking up in Biden's approval rating. They feel as if there is momentum and things are shifting in this big midterm election calculation. Do you see that?
Well, I think they had a good summer among Democrats. If you look at the polling changes, Biden's approval numbers and other issues like that, most of that is Democrats coming home, Democrats feeling invested in the cycle after being completely tuned out. But, you know, if I look at Joe Biden's approval rating numbers right now, job approval rating numbers in your poll, if you told me that the disapproval of the sitting president this close to the election was going to be 55%, I'd take that. Particularly given the fact that we have a collapsing stock market, you continue to have inflation problems. As we discussed earlier, crime is going to continue to be a very significant issue. And the composite of issues that at the end of the day I think voters are going to have in mind when they go to the voting booth this November are all issues where Republicans can win on if we engage those issues and talk about them heading into November.
Stephen, what you haven't mentioned is something that Democrats want to pin on almost every Republican running statewide in this campaign, which is abortion. Not just abortion, but as a proxy for fundamental rights and freedoms and stability in politics. And there have been some Republicans who have been backpedaling a little bit on this. How do you see abortion playing out in the races you're most interested in and will be invested in this cycle?
Well, you know, again, I think this is an issue that helps Democrats get Democrats back in the fold. It helps them get younger voters re-engaged on their side. I think, again, if you look at your own poll, which I studied with great detail, you know, the top issues are still the inflation, economy, crime, as we talked about earlier. Then further down is abortion. I think it's possible the Democrats are making a big mistake by trying to make the entire summer about that. And then when we come back to the fall, they'll already have talked about that. And then we have to go back to the things that really make people think about who they want to support. And that is whether this administration and the management in Congress has been doing a good job in the issues they care about, which is what's the cost of groceries, what's the cost of gas, how's the economy doing, and is my IRA or my 401k still worth what it was a couple of years ago?
Stephen Law, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for your perspective.
Thank you very much.
A judge has ruled Georgia's Republican governor, Brian Kemp, must testify in Fulton County's investigation into attempts to interfere in the 2020 election, but he will not have to appear until after the November midterms. The governor's lawyers argued he was protected from testifying because of his position, but the judge disagreed. Kemp is facing a rematch against Democrat Stacey Abrams in November. He will not have to testify until after that election. Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan says there are signs of authoritarianism in the Republican Party. Hogan has been a longtime critic of former President Trump and his supporters. Despite this, he is criticizing remarks President Biden made at a speech last week in Maryland. That speech compared Trump ideology to, quote, semi-fascism. Speaking on Face the Nation Sunday, Hogan highlighted the disadvantages of using that kind of language in politics.
I think it's that kind of divisive rhetoric on both sides that's really bad for America. And I've been talking about the toxic politics, and when if Republicans are calling Democrats socialists and communists, and we have the president of the United States calling Republicans fascists, I don't think it adds to the overall discussion.
Hogan went on to call for more transparency in the investigation into Mr. Trump and the FBI's search of his Mar-a-Lago home. He also downplayed rumors of a potential 2024 presidential run, saying he was, quote, lukewarm to the idea, and he is focusing on finishing his term as governor. President Biden is seeing a small but possibly significant boost in his job approval rating. What's behind the rise, plus a look at who Republican voters want as their 2024 nominee. And 9/11 victims will not be entitled to billions of dollars of frozen assets belonging to Afghanistan's central bank. Why a federal judge is rejecting their bid to access that money. Our Catherine Herridge will explain. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
In an original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I am Major Garrett. Here's a look at some of our top stories. The White House says President Biden will travel to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania on Labor Day. The trip kicks off this president's campaign schedule as Democrats in both states face contentious midterm elections. Plus, a Georgia district attorney has asked a judge to reject Senator Lindsey Graham's attempts to quash a subpoena requiring him to appear before a grand jury. Now, South Carolina Republican was summoned in July to testify before a special grand jury investigating potential 2020 election interference from Donald Trump and others. And a federal judge has indicated she is open to appointing a third party to examine documents seized from former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. The Justice Department says a limited portion of those documents contain information that might fall under attorney-client privilege. Meanwhile, federal intelligence officials are working to determine if Trump's handling of the classified materials poses a threat to national security. Natalie Brand has more.
The U.S. Justice Department faces a new deadline this week to provide more information about what documents were seized from former President Donald Trump's Florida residence. In a new court filing Monday, the DOJ said a team review identified a limited set of materials that potentially contain attorney-client privileged information and is going through normal procedures to address privilege disputes. Federal Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida has signaled she may appoint a special master or independent party to review the documents, though she's not yet made a final decision. Friday's release of the heavily redacted affidavit behind the search reveals of the 15 boxes returned to the National Archives in January, 67 documents were marked confidential, 92 marked secret, and another 25 marked top secret. The affidavit also indicated that some of the documents may have contained information from CIA spies or informants.
This is the most sensitive material of the United States intelligence community.
In response to requests from U.S. lawmakers, the Director of National Intelligence says her office plans to conduct a review to determine whether the former president's handling of classified material put national security at risk.
I did nothing wrong. They brought many FBI agents in, all right before the midterms.
The former president has come out swinging against the FBI search, and so have some of his most ardent supporters.
If there's a prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified information, after the Clinton debacle, there'll be riots in the streets.
Former Obama and George W. Bush White House officials have criticized Graham's comments as, quote, dangerous and inciting January 6th all over again. Natalie Brandt, CBS News, Washington.
After several months of sliding, President Biden's approval rating appears to be on the rise. It now stands at 45%. In a recent survey from CBS taken between August 24th and 26th among registered voters, Biden's numbers are now 3 points higher than they were in July. That's on the approval side. The president's appraisal of handling the economy, gas prices, and inflation also saw figures rise at least 5% in each of those categories, this over the last month. For more on this, CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now. Okay, significant or not, we should note that these are better numbers for the president, but he's still underwater.
Well, 70-something days from the midterm election, the White House is certainly welcoming numbers like these. And what's interesting is the numbers that we saw, particularly among women and on the issues. So we're seeing that abortion is something that's really driving voters, independents and those in the suburbs. We saw an uptick among about 7 points among white college-educated women. So this shows a little bit of Democrats kind of coming home to Biden in the closing months of the campaign, but also abortion as a driver among key voters. We also saw in this poll that a majority of voters were saying that gas prices were coming down, so people may be feeling a little bit better about the economy. But really, these numbers on abortion are key drivers, at least at this point. And talking to Democrats and Republicans, both sides are acknowledging that this certainly is a factor that they have to contend with. And Republicans are trying to focus on the economy because of that. And Democrats are trying to think of the ways to really keep and capture this momentum that they see right now.
And of course, one of the things that's grabbed headlines, not just here in Washington, Caitlin, but across the country, the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. And our CBS News Battleground Tracker shows just how politically split the country is over that FBI attempt to retrieve documents, some of them classified, from former president's private residence. That is to say, President Trump. Look at this. 85% of registered Democrats say they believe this search was designed to protect national security. Meanwhile, 80% of registered Republicans see it as something deeply political, meaning this is a politicized Justice Department doing something to former President Trump. Caitlin, is that consistent with what you've heard from Republicans and Democrats in Congress?
It is. It's kind of the line of messaging that we've been hearing from Republicans and Democrats in Congress. However, there's been a little bit of a divide. On the House side, you certainly see Republicans rank and file, but also leadership coalescing around the former president on this, echoing his rhetoric and vowing to investigate the Department of Justice and the FBI if they are to take power. Republicans on the Senate side are looking at a little bit of a different dynamic. We've heard Mitch McConnell say that it's kind of a 50-50 split whether Republicans take control of the Senate. He's been a little bit more negative than the House projections. And that's because in some of these key races, candidates really matter. We see that reflected in our poll. And we also see that the former president talking about him and kind of his factoring into into this midterm election could be a drag on Republicans, especially since you showed the breakdown of the numbers among Democrats and Republicans on this issue, but among independent voters, they are siding on where Democrats are, saying that this is an issue of national security. So if you're looking at the Senate map, you're looking at those voters that you need to attract. So on one hand, Republicans know that Donald Trump, of course, rallies the base. There still is a question about whether he can turn out voters when he's not on the ticket. But they're also very conscious of independent voters and those swing voters that they need to attract in these midterm elections in some of these key races, especially on the Senate side.
So, Caitlin, the next election immediately before us is the midterm, but everyone knows that the presidential campaign begins right after the midterm election ends. So let's talk about that a little bit. A recent USA Today poll shed some light on who both parties won at the top of the ticket in 2024. 59% of Republican voters, according to that survey, believe that Donald Trump should be the next nominee for the Republican Party, whereas 44% of Democrats want Biden to be the next nominee. What can we deduce from that?
Well, for Republicans, Trump has been not only popular, but also someone who is, to whom the base is really endeared. For Democrats, Biden hasn't been that figure. He hasn't been that person that, really, has rallied the troops. He hasn't been particularly popular, covering his campaign. A lot of Democratic voters saw him as kind of an ends to a means, which was to get rid of Donald Trump. And that's kind of what he really seized on in a lot of ways. So he hasn't really been that figure among Democrats who is, especially exciting to them, and there are questions about whether he'll run again. But what's interesting here and something to look at are what are the coalitions that are formed after this election that will kind of inform whether certain Republicans run, whether they see Trump as a factor, and what are the margins. If Republicans take over everything, that's a different question. But in some of these key races, if they aren't able to win, there will be a lot of questions about Trump's dynamic.
No doubt. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much. A federal judge is saying families of 9/11 victims with claims against the Taliban will not get any of the nearly $4 billion in frozen Afghan assets. The judge's report stated, and I quote, "The Taliban's victims have fought for years for justice, accountability, and compensation. They are entitled to no less, but the law limits what the court may authorize," unquote. The money is part of $7 billion seized by the U.S. from the Afghan central bank. This before the Taliban regained control of the country last year. President Biden determined that half of the funds would go toward helping Afghans, with the other half designated for families who lost loved ones in the September 11th attacks, and they would have to fight for that money in court. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge is with us now. So, Catherine, last month you interviewed 77-year-old Bob Essington. He was injured in 1983 when a truck bomb terrorized the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. I want to play a little bit of that conversation.
Essington, a State Department and Vietnam veteran, rarely speaks of the 1983 attack.
It's hard to talk about what happened.
Why is it hard?
I think it's because of all of the friends that I lost.
Now he wants President Biden to acknowledge his story.
I don't care about the total amount that I get or anything like that. It's just his recognition of us, the sacrifices that all of us made.
Catherine, explain how Bob fits into this story and how victims' compensation typically works.
Well, Major, back in 2015, Congress created a terrorism victims compensation fund. It's funded through fines and penalties, and since 2015, it's paid out about $3 billion to victims of terrorism just globally who are American citizens. But when this Afghan money was frozen a year ago by the Biden administration, the process was different. They deviated from this congressionally mandated process.
And is that deviation important? And is that deviation basically leaving some Americans who might otherwise have qualified out in the cold or having to fight on some other legal front?
Well, the deviation was significant. There was an executive order that was signed by President Biden earlier this year that took the Afghan funds and it split it in half. About $3.5 billion was earmarked for Afghan aid, and the other $3.5 billion was left to a New York court to decide claims by victims of terrorism. Specifically, there's a small group of 9/11 families who have claims against the Taliban. And what they've been trying to do is attach their claims to those frozen Afghan funds so they can be paid out. People like Bob Essington, who was badly injured in a terrorism attack in the 1980s by a group that's connected to Iran. He and others have said, hundreds actually wrote to the White House and said, wait a second, we should really share all the money equally. That's been the central principle of this compensation fund, and this time really should be no different.
Meaning that the Taliban money should go into this broader fund.
Correct.
And that's what historically has happened, but so far isn't. Does that mean that those who are direct victims of 9/11 have better access to this fund, these funds?
Well, with the judge's decision or recommendation, what they've said is that they just don't feel that the 9/11 victims, a small group of victims, can attach their claims to the funds. They say this would be the court acknowledging that the official government of Afghanistan is the Taliban. And due to the separation of powers, that's not a call that can be made by the U.S. courts. That can only be made by the president himself. So the courts have said for now that there will be no access to the frozen funds by these 9/11 families or any other terrorism victims at this point.
So the natural question arises, Catherine, if you can answer it, is this the final word?
Well, it's not really, actually. This judge's recommendation is subject to review, but it will be a pretty steep legal hill to climb in order to make the case that these claims should be paid out from the frozen Afghan funds. Lawyers who work in this area have told me in the past that typically there's a congressional fix. They pass some legislation which takes the money, the fines or the penalties, in this case it would be frozen assets, and it directs it into this compensation fund for all U.S. victims so that it could be divided equally among all of them.
And perhaps Congress will step up. Catherine Herridge, thanks so very much.
You're welcome.
An historic Supreme Court ruling, a mixed bag on the economy, and low enthusiasm about who should be in the White House. What is driving voters to the polls for the midterm elections? I will ask the executive director of the Democratic Congressional Committee about what he sees as the issues that could define the months ahead. You are streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
In the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, abortion has emerged as a key issue for Democratic voters months from the midterms. Now, according to CBS News polling, 77% of Democratic voters say abortion is, quote, very important, unquote, for their vote for Congress. That polling comes as the Democratic candidate who ran heavily on the abortion issue, Pat Ryan, beat Republican Mark Molinaro in a New York special election last week. It is a race that is seen as a potential bellwether for Democrats nationwide. For more on this, Tim Persico joins us. He is the executive director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and that means as executive director, he's really deeply involved in day-to-day nuts and bolts of the Democrats' pursuit of and preservation, if they can achieve it, their House majority. Tim, it's great to see you. As I read it, recently, you had a closed-door session with Democrats, and you said, here's the data, and if the election were held today, we would lose our majority. Is that still true? And if so, how do you reverse that data?
Well, thank you for having me. It was a few months ago, I think, we had that conversation. And since that time, the landscape has shifted dramatically in favor of the Democrats. I think that while it's certainly not true that we are in the same position we were then, I think we have a lot of work to do. But we are certainly in a better position today electorally than we were when we had that conversation several months ago. If the data that you're looking at now were to be used in an election today, and I know it's not today, do you think Democrats could hold, no matter even narrowly, their majority? Yes. You would? Yes. So basically what you see now is a landscape in which Democrats could retain, maybe just by the slenderest of margins, but still retain their House majority. Yeah, well, I mean, just taking your network's projections from this weekend. I know you had 209 seats as the projection, but there was a margin of error there of 13 seats. Right. Even by your own projection, there's a path there to retaining the 222 seats that we hold now. Like I said earlier, it's hard. It's hard work, and there's certainly, a lot of headwinds that we need to encounter here. But the fact is this: the Republicans' extreme agenda, particularly on issues of choice, and their total lack of an agenda on economic issues, has left open a space for us to win and retain our majority. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That doesn't mean that we are going to wake up in 71 days, and no matter what we do, we're going to retain this majority. We have a lot of work to do. But it is a fact that there is a path to retaining our majority, for sure. So I made reference to this, Tim, in the open. Pat Ryan wins, 19th District of New York, Hudson Valley. How much does one election outcome in a special election in the Hudson River Valley in New York have to do with the rest of the country? And can you name me a congressional district or two that you look at now because of what you saw on the 19th that tells you it's not only winnable but likely winnable? Yeah, sure. I mean, what does one election tell us about the entire fall? Not that much, and I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that this does not mean that the election's over and we've won. But I think that it's not just one election; it's all 4 elections that have occurred post the Dobbs ruling by the Supreme Court in New York 19, in New York 23, in Minnesota 1. Kansas, the abortion referendum, across the map, we have seen dramatic increases in Democratic performance since the Dobbs ruling. Now, Pat Ryan is an exceptional candidate, without question. But Marcus Molinaro should have had some strategic advantages in that race. He is the county executive from Dutchess County. He was able to use that base to overperform in Dutchess County over President Biden. It's just that Pat Ryan was such a strong candidate throughout the district, overperforming President Biden's numbers by such significant margins that he was able to overcome that. That is quite an achievement. And like I said, it's not the be-all, end-all, but what it does tell us is that when voters actually go out, when things happen in the real world and voters vote, Democrats are doing quite well. And I think that is as meaningful as anything else that we have. And if you're asking about other races that are similar to New York 19 special, Nevada 3 with Susie Lee, that is a race that is actually a district that's actually somewhat better for us in a state that's very pro-choice. I think that's an excellent example. She's already up on the air, defining her opponent's position on choice. I think that, basically, it is salient across the map.
Okay, very good. On Face the Nation yesterday, when I was substituting for Margaret Brennan, I asked DNC Chair Jamie Harrison about President Biden calling the GOP semi-fascist. Let's take a listen.
He has always been somebody who does what my grandfather used to do, which is speak it plain, say it plain to the American people. And what we see right now is a full frontal attack by these extreme MAGA Republicans in this country. And that
Mr. Chairman, you embrace
our freedoms as a people.
Mr. Chairman, you embrace the rhetoric semi-fascism to describe the Republican Party.
Well, it's not about the embracing. It's calling what it is, what it is.
What it is. Tim, is the Republican Party you're running against through the DCCC semi-fascist?
I mean, unfortunately, there certainly are members that do embrace some semi-fascist points of view, for sure.
And is that something, when you talk about the extremism of Republicans, you're going to weave into rhetoric this campaign season?
I don't think we need to. I think that it's pretty clear that the extremist points of view that are throughout the Republican Party they stand alone. They stand on their own. And I think voters have clearly rejected them time and time again, and they're going to do so again in November.
Tim Persico, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break, but now is a good time to remind you of something important. You can stay up to date by downloading our CBS News app. And there you can catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. Please stay with us. You are streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
NASA's much-anticipated Artemis 1 test flight has been postponed due to engine trouble. The $4.1 billion rocket was scheduled to take off this morning on a 42-day uncrewed mission beyond the moon and back. But engineers struggled to get one of the rocket's engines to its correct operating temperature. If today's problems can be fixed, the next launch opportunity would be Friday at 12:48 p.m. Eastern. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can do so. You can see them anytime on the CBS News website. All you have to do is head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail. We're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings. CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We are so excited we just can't hide it.
CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it.
Let's go. CBS mornings, starting at 7.
Welcome, everyone. I'm John Dickerson. Thank you for joining us. Here's a look at the top stories we are following right now. We're learning more about the documents seized by federal agents during their search of Mar-a-Lago and why the Office of the